Alright, so today's lesson is going to be fairly short. We're going to be talking about classifying conics. We're also going to look at, again, going from this general form into the standard forms for each particular one. If you are in regular pre-cal, once we look at classifying them and then doing an example again with the parabolas, after that you can stop watching. Accelerated, we're going to look at doing it with ellipses and hyperbolas, and then we're done. So it's going to be really quick. Alright, so again, this was that generalized conics equation where we have ax squared plus bxy plus cy squared plus dx plus ey plus f equals 0. So the nice thing about classifying these conics, it only really comes out to what a is and what c is. So if a equals c, this is actually going to be a circle. So if those are ever equal to one another, they are going to be a circle. So we don't really care that much about circles, but just so you know, if a equals c, it's always going to be a circle. And as we start actually turning these things into their standard equations, it would make sense why if a and c are equal to one another, it would be a circle. So if a times c is going to be greater than 0, this is going to be an ellipse. So what that means is as long as a and c are both positive numbers, it's going to be an ellipse, which is nice because you don't really have to do the multiplication, you just have to see, hey, is a positive, is c positive? Yes, it's an ellipse. So if a equals 0 or c equals 0, so if one of these two things equals 0, then it's going to be a parabola. So you can kind of think about it as a times c equals 0, it will be a parabola. So that just means that you're missing one of the squared terms. So anytime you're missing one of the squared terms, it's going to be a parabola. So that's why if one of these is 0, that just means you don't have a squared term. So you're missing your x squared or you're missing your y squared. So this is going to be your parabola. And the last one is if a times c is less than 0, this is going to be your hyperbola. So the reason why a times c is less than 0 is because one of these two values is negative. Just one of them is negative. And as long as one of them is negative, that's why you get that minus sign inside of that standard equation. Because if you remember, for a hyperbola, it would be x squared over a squared minus y squared over b squared equals 1. So it's this minus we're looking for, so that's why we would get that less than 0. So as long as you have one negative, you would have a hyperbola. So again, these are how to classify given an equation like this, so you can quickly determine which one you're working with. So for all of my pre-cal kids, you need to be able to classify them given a generalized formula. If you have a generalized formula, you can make the standard of any of these. But for my regular pre-cal kids, you're only going to focus on the parabola because we already did a lesson on how to make a parabola into the generalized formulas, into that vector format. Or sorry, not vector, the vertex format. So again, general pre-cal, if you ever get a parabola as an equation, you must go further. Any other one, I'm just asking you to classify it. Accelerated, we're going to then look at an ellipse and a hyperbola. So we're going to look at some examples here in a second. So let's do some examples. So again, this is on one of those slides, so you can either pause and write it all down, or you can just look at the slides and write it down as well. So let's do some examples. We have So we are going to start by classifying each of these three. Then I'm going to do the example that is a parabola to turn it into its standard form. And then after that, my general pre-cal kids can just log off. Accelerated, we're going to do the other two as well. All right. So looking at each of these equations, what you really want to focus on is the squared terms, so the coefficients of your squared terms. So for example, on this top one, notice I only have an x squared. I'm missing the y squared term. So that means my y squared term, that coefficient would be 0. Since I'm missing one of the two, this is instantly going to be a parabola. So looking at the next one, again, we're focusing on these two squared terms, this x squared and this y squared. Since the coefficients are both positive values, this is going to be an ellipse. So looking at this next example, again, looking at the coefficients of my squared, I have one positive 4 and one negative 9. So since I have one positive and one negative, this is going to be my hyperbola. So classifying them should be that quick. You look at the coefficients of your squared terms. If you're missing one of the squared terms, parabola. If both are positive, ellipse. If one is negative, hyperbola. So also understand, if both are negative values, it would also be an ellipse, because two negatives multiplied together make a positive. So again, if these two terms were both negative, it would still be an ellipse. Alright, so we're going to put this parabola into its standard equation, and then you would be able to pull out information from that. So let's look at this parabola, and then my general pre-cal kids, you're done. Alright, so again, when we have a general equation like this and we want to put it into the standard form of whatever, we're going to be completing the square. So we're going to complete the square here. So you should already have notes on completing the square, so you can reference back to completing the square if you need to. So again, my x is my squared term, so I'm going to keep x squared and the x on the left side of my equation. I'm going to move everything else to the right side. So this is going to be x squared minus 14x blank equals add 4y over, subtract 61 over, blank. So remember, write blanks on both sides. That will help you remember that when you're completing the square on the left side, you also need to add something on the right side to make sure they stay balanced as an equation. So we're going to take half of b, write it underneath, so this is going to be a -7. So then I'm going to square this -7 and put it in both of the blanks. So -7 squared is a +49. So now this is a perfect square trinomial. So this would factor to x minus 7 squared. So on the right side, we can simplify that, and we get y, or 4y minus 12. So the last thing I need to do is then just factor out whatever is in front of that y value. So I'm going to GCF that 4, leaving me with a y minus 3, x minus 7, that quantity squared. So that's it. So you need to recognize that it's a parabola. If it is a parabola, then you need to go and put it into its standard format, and you can then go and find different pieces of information. Since this is an x squared, this is going to open up or down. You know that the center is going to be at the point 7, 3. You know this 4 equals 4p, so p is equal to 1. So then you can go and add, so forth and so on, to look for your focus and your directrix. So again, we're done at this point. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. Otherwise, bye, general pre-cal kids. Remember, we do have a test coming up on Friday. I'm going to put later today how that test is going to be taken. And remember, on Wednesday during this time slot, instead of a lecture, I'm just going to do a Zoom conference call, and you can ask questions. So basically it's just going to be if you have any kind of questions at all over this unit. I've also put up a review guide for this unit. It is already up there, and I've decided that I will give 30 points extra credit in the homework category if you complete it and turn it in by that Friday when all of your other homework is due. So there's homework tonight as well, so you have 4 homework assignments that's due on Friday. You have the parabola, you have the ellipse, the hyperbola, and then the classifying and the conics. So please read the note under the classifying comment or conics homework, because it tells you which ones you need to do depending on what class you're in. And then there is that review guide. Again, I will give 30 points into the homework category if you complete that. So please just complete it. Get ready for this test. I'm going to look at questions now. Alright, so let's look at the other two now for accelerated. So for accelerated, you need to be able to turn any of these equations into their standard format. So if it's an ellipse, turn it into the standard for an ellipse. If it's a hyperbola, turn it into a hyperbola. So let's look at the ellipse problem that we saw earlier, which was 4x squared plus 9y squared minus 8x minus 18y minus 23 equals 0. So this is going to be a little bit different than the parabola, but you still have to complete the square, because if you remember for the ellipse, you have two quantities that are squared, so we still have to complete the square. So this time around, sorry I don't have the board space to write down like directions, so just write them down, revisit the words I'm saying. So the first thing I want to do is I want to group my x's together and I want to group my y's together. And then I also want to move this constant to the other side. So that means I'm going to have a 4x squared minus 8x. I'm going to put a blank because, again, I'm going to need that blank to complete the square for my x's. So then I also have plus 9y squared minus 18y. Also a blank because I have to complete the square for my y's. Adding that 23 over. Notice how I have two blanks on this left side, so I'm going to need two blanks on the right side. Because when I find this number, it's going to be over here. When I find this number, I need to also add it on the other side. So, again, if you notice, we have coefficients that are not 1 for in front of our x squared and our y squared term. So I need to take out a GCF for each of those terms. So that's what I'm going to do first. So I'm going to take out this 4 for this, and I'm going to take out this 9 for this quantity. So this would give me a 4 parentheses x squared minus 2x blank plus 9 parentheses y squared minus 2y blank equals that 23 blank blank. So now I'm just going to complete the square for both of these. So straightforward at this point. So this is going to be a -1. This one is also a -1 because that's what half of b is. So when I square this, this is going to be a +1. So that means when I'm adding to the other side, since I have to still multiply it by this 4, I'm going to be adding a 4 over here. And same over here, -1 squared is a +1. So 9 times this 1 gives me a +9 that I have to add to the other side as well. So we can now go and simplify. So this would factor to x minus 1, that quantity squared. This would be y minus 1, that quantity squared. And this would equal 36. So we're almost done. The last step at this point, if you remember from our ellipse question, I believe it was the first one that we did as an example, this has to be a 1. So the last thing I just need to do is to divide each of these terms by 36. So simplifying, so this 4 over this 36, this would become x minus 1 quantity squared over 9 plus y minus 1 quantity squared over 4 equals 1. And this is now in that ellipse format. So you can see that your center is going to be at 1, 1. You can see that your a value is going to be 3. Your b value is going to be 2. Yada, yada, yada. You can then go and solve for anything else. You can solve for the foci if you need to. You can solve for your endpoints, your vertices and your co-vertices. You know, since the a is under your x, this is going to be a horizontal, so it's going to be a wider ellipse than the other one. So let me walk through this one more time since this is new. So what I did was I grouped my x's, I grouped my y's, I put blanks after them because I need to complete the square for each of the x's and the y's. I added 2 blanks on the right side after I moved my constant over. I then completed the square, so I took each of these problems as like a separate problem. So I factored out my 4, I then completed the square. I then needed to remember that I needed to add a 4 to the other side because that's 4 times that 1. Then the same over here, I did this one, I completed this square, and I knew I needed to add a 9 to the other side because that 9 times that 1. And then the last thing, I just divided by whatever number was over here on the right side because I need it to equal 1 to be in that standard equation. So I'll give you guys some time to look this over, and then you can ask any kind of questions that you have. Then we're going to do the hyperbola one, which is going to be the exact same format, which is nice. It's just a hyperbola. Alright, let's do the last one then. So let's look at the hyperbola question. So that one was 4x squared minus 9y squared minus 40x plus 72y minus 80 equals 0. Alright, so same kind of thing. We already classified this as a hyperbola. One was positive, one was negative. So what we're going to do is we're going to, again, separate our x's and our y's, add our constant to the other side. But I want to put the negative term second. Because if you remember in the standard equation, it's something, a positive something minus something. So that minus is going to come from this negative value. So I'm going to put the negative one second always. So this is going to be 4x squared minus 40x blank minus 9y squared plus 72y blank, adding that 80 over, blank blank. So again, always put the negative. So if this was a negative 4x squared, then just put the x in the second spot. So that's the only big difference, is just put it second, whichever one is negative. So we can complete the square, but since both of these coefficients aren't 1, I need to factor that out, and this is where I'm going to factor out that negative as well. So this is going to be a 4 times the quantity x squared minus 10x blank, a negative 9 y squared plus 8y blank equals 80 blank blank. Alright, so we're going to now complete the square. So let's do the x one first. So I'm going to take half of this b term, which is negative 5. I'm going to square it. So this gives me a positive 25. So what I'm going to add to the other side is 4 times this 25, which is a positive 100. So same with over here. I'm going to start to complete this square as well. So I'm going to take half of this 8, which is a positive 4. I'm going to square that, which is a positive 16. So then I need to multiply negative 9 times positive 16, which gives me 144. So a negative 144. So we can go and factor and simplify pieces. So this is going to be 4 times the quantity x minus 5 squared minus 9 times the quantity y plus 4 squared equals 36. So the last piece I need to do is then divide each term by this 36. So this over here would simplify down to x minus 5 quantity squared over 9. Notice how I now have this minus sign where it needs to go. So minus this y plus 4 quantity squared over 4 equals 1. So again, now we have all of the, oops, this was a negative 8y, negative 4, negative 4. It doesn't affect anything else though. I'm sorry. When I factored out that negative, I forgot to actually factor out that negative right there. Alright, so looking at this, we can see that we have a center at 5, 4. Since our x is the first term, this is going to be a horizontal opening parabola, so it's going to open up to the left and to the right. Your a term is 3, your b term is 2, and then you can find other pieces of information from that. So again, this is all that it is today. So if you have any questions, well, let me just go over this one more time and then I'll look at your questions. So I separated my x's and my y's. Whichever term was negative, whichever squared term was negative, I'm always going to place that second, because I want this minus sign to remain in the middle the entire time. So then I completed the square for my x's, completed the square for my y values, then making sure that whatever is, after I squared it, I had to multiply it by whatever this term was over here, same with this 9, then divide whatever outcome is over here. And just so you know, since this is a classroom setting, that when you divide by whatever this number is, it should be a nice even division. Okay, again, it should be a nice even division. Otherwise, you probably messed up somewhere over here. So again, this should be a nice even division. So we have ones over here, whole numbers in our denominator, because this is a classroom setting. Now in real life, that's not necessarily always going to be true. When you divide, you just need to always make sure you get a 1. So in the denominator, it could be a decimal. Again, that's fine. In actual math, that's completely fine to have decimals in the denominator for an ellipse or a hyperbola. So I'll give you guys a couple seconds to look over this, and then we're going to be done. So again, later tonight on my website, I'm going to put how we are going to be taking this test, so you know how to prepare, I guess, to say for Friday. But that's pretty much it for the test. So it's not that you don't go further, it's just that this is at the stopping point that I'm going to be doing today. It's just you need to be able to get it into this format, so then you can find pieces of information to go further. So then you could find that the center was 5, 4, A was 3, B was 2. Use that A and that B and that center to find out where your vertex is, your potential focus. You can then go and find that conjugate axis, and you could sketch it, etc., etc. But I'm just stopping here for today. Again, I don't have the board space to continue on, but today was just going from this general formula to the standard formula. So the question was asked, how do you complete the square if you're missing one of these or you're missing your y or your x term? So you're actually hoping for that because you don't have to complete the square because it is a square already. So it would simply be, I'm just going to erase this part of the board. If you had something like 9x squared and you didn't have anything else, well, this is the squared term. So you're done. You don't have to do any of this stuff. You just keep it as is, and then the last part, when you're dividing everything by whatever that number is, it would just divide out right here, and you would just have an x squared term. And since this is just x squared, that means your center has an x value of 0. Because this is kind of like saying x minus 0 quantity squared. So you could complete the square using a 0 if you really wanted to do that with your life. But that is a squared. So you're done. Alright. So again, later tonight I will put up how the test format will be done. It is going to be on Friday. You have homework today. Again, if you should be accelerated at this point, so you're just going to do all of that homework to get practice with completing the square. The review that is already posted, you can also start working on that if you really want to. I'm going to be giving that as 30 points extra credit towards the homework grade. So that's basically like a homework and a half grade that will be extra credit, just to give you guys something. And Wednesday at this time slot will be a recitation kind of thing. That way you can just ask your questions because we don't have any more lecture, and that will be on Zoom. Otherwise, we are done. So if you have any more questions, you can text me through Remind. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe or wherever those buttons may be on your screen. Just kidding, you don't have to. So, bye.